Hello and welcome to the Sideboard here at the Star City Games Open in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am joined by new Salt Lake City resident and Star City Games Invitational Top 8 competitor, Jonathan Jobe. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Ruben.
And you've brought something a little bit interesting here that we saw win the Classic in Knoxville last week.
Right.
Win a little under the radar because people sometimes don't pay attention to the Knoxville deck lists.
True.
But you certainly do,
Yes.
and you brought it here today. This is something I've been calling Archangel Aggro.
Sure. I like to call it Green White Little Kid.
Green White Little Kid. Although the traditional Green White Little Kids have things like Sublime Archangel
Sure,
and just
sure.
like try and hit as hard as possible.
Right.
And the Green White sort of life gain decks have other life gain spells like Bubbling Cauldron. I've seen one of those around the room.
Wow, all right. I did not see that today.
Very focused on the life gain
Okay.
aspect. This one is designed to race.
Yes.
And you've got two ways that are very good at racing. And the first one's Archangel of Thune.
Yes.
A card that had a lot of hype when it first got released. Didn't see a lot of play the first week after M14, but then won the Classic. Talk to me about Archangel.
Archangel is just absolutely what makes the deck go. It has so many fun little interactions. Obviously, if you get to live the dream where you pair it up with the Silverblade Paladin and then get in there, you gain 7 life, put 2+1/+1 counters on every single one of your guys.
Sure.
In my testing, I didn't even realize it until I was playing a little bit on Moto, where I had Trostani in play first, and then I played Archangel. And I was like, oh, wow, would you like to add +1/+1 to all your guys? I'm like, I sure as heck would.
Exactly.
And then I get to put him on Stack It Right, so I actually get to gain 4 life with it, which could be relevant. And then on top...
5 life, because it's toughness.
Oh, yes, toughness, my bad, 5 life. And then on the Scavenging Ooze as well, where it was there was actually a fun interaction one time where I had an Archangel in play with a couple little dorks, and it was late in the game, and I drew an ooze, and I played it, and it was just this super massive, put like 6 counters on my entire team.
Absolutely.
And my opponent was just like, yeah, I guess I'm in deep trouble at this point.
So Archangel, we just went over. The other one that sort of is the theme of the deck is Trostani.
Yes.
We sort of referenced a little bit of what Trostani does, but it does even more in this
Right.
deck, being able to, obviously pairs up very well with Archangel of Thune, but with the high toughness of most of the creatures in the deck, it's really just a powerhouse.
Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, with the Advent of the Worm that's in the deck, it's clearly just wonderful there with the Populate and stuff like that. But it's also kind of one of those games, because it is double green, double white, a lot of times you don't, you play 3 townships, so a lot of times you don't have it right on 4. But it's one of those cards that when Jund tries to take control in the later of the games, you can slam Trostani, and then you can slowly actually outgrind Jund.
Wow. Yeah, and that's not an easy thing especially for a green-white deck that
Right.
doesn't have a ton of elimination
Yeah.
for that deck to do. So we talked about the 2 life gain cards. Now we can move on to a couple of the aggro cards that you might not expect to see in a life gain deck. That's Advent of the Worm and Silverblade Paladin, which have, as we mentioned, very unique interactions with Archangel and Silverblade put together. You can put counters on everything. Advent of the Worm with Trostani is one of the best tokens you can populate. And even working together, a double striking 5/5 trampler is
He
no
hits
joke.
hard. He definitely hits hard. That's actually how I won my last matchup, was where I just on turn 4 I passed, and my opponent was playing mono red. He put in a Thunderball Hellkite, bashed me for 5. I'm like, all right, cool. And instead put in Advent, put Silverblade Plow, bash you for 10. He's like, I'm losing this race all of a sudden. You're like, yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult to be losing a race when you have Thunderball Hellkite
Right.
in your deck, but that's certainly one of them. And this deck is designed to race. All of the
all day
interactions
long.
are just perfect against decks that have basic mountains in them.
Of course.
And on top of those 4 cards that you might not always see, we see a couple of cards that you see all the time. Loxodon Smiter, just being a big guy, can gain double strike, can get even bigger thanks
Right.
to Archangel of Thune. Voice of Resurgence makes a token that can be sometimes bigger
Yep.
than the Advent of the Worm token.
Yep.
And Scavenging Ooze, as we mentioned before, taking advantage of that 1 life.
It's actually very, very, very important. The more I've actually played with the card in the format, the actual just individual life gains of Scavenging Ooze have been backbreaking in a lot of different situations. Especially with the format is fairly grindy at the moment, where a lot of games try to control and everything like that. And so if you can actually save your oozes, where it's a 2-drop, but it's really not a 2-drop.
Right.
It's something that you really want to hold on to, let them burn through a lot of their threats, and then when you get into the mid to late game, play it, and then just you can become a 6/6 almost out of nowhere.
Absolutely, and this is a deck that doesn't have a lot of ways to put creatures in the graveyard by itself. Doesn't
No.
have a lot of ways to kill opposing creatures, but your creatures are dying so often
Right.
that it's good to take advantage.
Yeah, of course, of course.
And you don't always play a 2-drop because oftentimes you're just playing a 1 into a 3.
Right.
Either a Smiter or a Silverblade Paladin or Fiend Hunter is another one that we have in the deck because of your mana elves. Having access to so many mana elves now with Elvish Mystic. But I notice we don't have Elvish Mystic in this.
We don't have Elvish Mystic because of the 2 colors. the Pilgrim just allows for the white to flow so much more easy, and then as well as the Arbor Elf. I mean, Arbor Elf is basically just Elvish Mystic with bonus.
Absolutely.
You know, because we play 7 lands that Arbor Elf doesn't affect, we play 11 lands that Arbor Elf doesn't affect, but so that's why we're playing 3 Arbor Elves and 4 of the Pilgrims.
Right, and because we have so many mana elves, we also have the Gavany Township.
Right.
We're a green-white deck, Gavany Township, making an argument to be the best of those lands, even better than Kesset Wolfrun.
Probably. I don't know.
It's close.
It's close. Gavany is obviously really good.
Yeah.
Wolfrun is just, I think
totally
it's a little
different
bit better,
kinds of decks,
but yeah. Agreed.
Absolutely. And then, of course, rounding out the deck, the Fiend Hunter that I mentioned, and Garruk Relentless, which is a card that I love. I've played it in Legacy before.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the card.
And in this deck serves a couple of unique roles. First of all, it's a Bitter Blossom against a lot of control decks, and it's also able to take down Olivia's, because a lot of the plan against Jund a lot of the time is for them to just try and steal your guys.
Right.
Because you have no way to deal with a resolved Olivia.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, that with the 2 Garruks and the 2 Fiend Hunters in the main, you at least have 4 straight-up answers to Olivia that you can hold on to. And honestly, when I've been playtesting the deck, Olivia hasn't really been that much of a problem, because most of my guys are big enough that Olivia just can't machine gun them down.
Right.
And then on top of it, if they're taking 2 turns to shoot something and then try and steal it and stuff like that, it's normally, don't get me wrong, the Farseek into Olivia, that's obviously more difficult. But,
Sure. But it's not as big of a problem as for most green-white little kid decks.
Of course, yeah, no, 100%.
So moving to the sideboard, your main deck is very similar to Heath Purdue's Knoxville winning list.
Yes.
Your sideboard's slightly different, and the chief difference is Wolfear Avenger.
Yeah.
You decided to add Wolfear Avenger because of the popularity of the red decks?
It was actually more of, I wanted to have a better plan against Jund and the Wrath-based decks. It originally was Unflinching Courage, and I figured that, we already have enough life gain between Archangel, Trostani, and Scavenging Ooze, and most of the time against the red decks, we're just faster than they are.
Sure.
Like, the Unflinching Courage really wasn't that impressive to me. And overall, I really don't like the card outside of Banned Hexproof to begin with.
Sure.
And so I decided to go with Wolfear Avenger in the fact that it obviously regenerates around the Wrath effects, and then against Bonfire, it allows me to keep a guy around, and it just does all sorts of fun little interactions that you need it to.
Now, when you're looking at the sideboard in the list down below this video, you're going to see a couple of interesting choices. Perhaps the one that catches your eye the most is a black mana symbol will pop up. We're not planning on casting that half of the card. We aren't casting the card Ready Willing. We're casting the card Ready.
Ready.
So why did we put Ready in the sideboard? What does that do for your deck?
It actually does a ton of different things. Once again, against the Wrath and Bonfire type decks, it obviously makes your guys indestructible, and that's just where everyone sees it at its prime. The absolute best places where it's been tons of fun is when you play against the Naya mid-range decks and stuff like that, and they, you're in this big kind of bash back and forth, and then all of a sudden they go into attack, and you're like, untap my team, make them indestructible?
Yeah.
And they just kind of look at you, they're like, oh,
and you have a lot of the same kinds of creatures,
exactly.
Too. So they have a Voice of Resurgence, and you have a Voice of
Right.
Resurgence. They have a Smiter, and you have a Smiter. And you're
Right.
like, oh, well, suddenly mine are one bigger.
Right, and then
even if they weren't, my 5/5 can block your 6/6 if it needs to.
It also makes, because they feel really safe a lot of time attacking with Reckoners and stuff like that, where they're like, oh, okay, well, even if he blocks, I can, shoot down this other guy and everything like that.
Right.
When your whole team's indestructible and you're like 12, you're like, yeah, I'm going to block with this 4/4, hit me for 4, I gotcha.
Absolutely.
Let's move on.
Being able to untap your Archangel mid-combat,
yes,
certainly
that one,
also very
I've done
good.
that before, and that was just absolutely the biggest blowout.
Selesnya Charm, another fabulous way of dealing with those giant red monsters
Right.
like Olivia and Thundermaw Hellkite. Garruk Primal Hunter stuck out to me in this deck list. What does that come in against?
It's more against the Wrath-based decks again, just because of the draw ability, plus, just putting a guy into play. It's just, you want to become, your early threats against, the Azorius Charm type decks aren't really the best. Obviously, you have Voice of Resurgence and Smiters, which are absolutely amazing. But, Silverblade Paladins, because they have main deck pillars and War Leader Helix and stuff like that, Angel isn't that good because you're not really trying to go that route.
Right.
So basically, you're replacing 5 drops with 5 drops, and Garruk is obviously incredibly difficult for them to deal with.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you look at the sideboard and you see how many cards you're bringing in against Jund and Blue White Red being the 2 most popular decks in the format, you might think to yourself, well, why don't we just main deck those? Well, the reason is twofold. One, their sideboard changes
Right.
and makes their deck much better against things like Silverblade Paladin.
Yes.
And 2, against all of the rest of the decks in the format, Silverblade Paladin and is just an absolute house against a lot of those decks. Things like Fiend Hunter you need to have in the main
Yes.
deck to be able to deal, and also the basic mountain decks, as I've been calling them, the Brian Kibler red-green aggro,
Right.
mono-red, anything trying to take advantage of Burning Earth mostly, this deck is very, very good against.
Yeah, you have 11 sources that actually hurt you against Burning Earth, which isn't that bad. But with the life gain on top of it, Burning Earth just really isn't a card. I've had people board it in against me, and I just kind of look at them like, yeah, that's great.
That's fantastic. I'll gain 70.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention is you already said that you would change one thing in the sideboard.
Yes.
Which is this list and the original list where you got this from have Ray of Revelation and Sundering Growth in the sideboard as ways to fight Bant Hexproof.
Yes.
Chiefly to fight Bant Hexproof. Of course, Ray of Revelation has you
Other
can fight
events.
Curse of Death's Hold and
Sure.
things like that. But in your deck, you don't particularly care about
Not
that
really.
card, and there aren't a ton of other things that you'd want to fight against. You said that you'd rather have Celestial Flare.
Very much so.
Can you explain why you'd rather have that against
Sure.
Bant Hexproof?
Because a lot of the times against the Bant Hexproof deck, even with, especially, you would definitely want to have one over the Sundering Growth. I would even play it over one of the Rays. A lot of times killing 2 enchantments is good, but most of the time when I've been playing against the Bant Hexproof deck, I didn't get to test a lot against it before this tournament, but from past tournaments, and I should have taken it more into consideration, they normally just stack up on one guy. And even if the guy is Geist Sustain Trapped, when they attack, the token definitely goes on the stack. So you can Celestial Flare it.
Yeah.
And it just, if you get away with that one guy, and especially if you get the guy with the Armadillo Cloak on it, I'm sorry, the new one.
The Unflinching card.
Unflinching card, sorry. Old school player, it's
You're
always
good.
going to be Armadillo Cloak to me.
Don't laugh, it works. The card's fine.
It's just absolutely backbreaking. And also, you can actually be fast enough where sometimes they have to be put into a blocker mode. And if they have to go into a blocker mode, so being able to Celestial Flare as a blocker is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Where even if they have like 2 guys and they're like bashing with one guy, you're like, all right, cool, race back. And they're like, have to block, you're like, all right, cool, sack that guy. And
The
they're
thing
like,
is that a lot of people know Celestial Flare exists, but they have to be able to race you, and your deck
Right.
is designed to race. So
Exactly.
what they'll have to do sometimes is leave back their Mana Elf. Even if they know Celestial Flare exists, they need to put it in front of the double striking Loxodon Smiter, or they need to
Exactly.
put it in front of some other giant animal that you've managed to build, like a double striking Silver Blade Paladin that's only paired with a small 1/1,
Right.
but they still need to prevent that damage.
Exactly.
And so also don't forget that you can use this how the combat phase works. You can block if they attack with 2 things.
yeah.
You can kill off their Voice of Resurgence in combat, and then during the end of combat step, the creature's still attacking,
Right.
and you can still get rid of their
Whatever you need to
unblockable
do.
whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, this deck looks like a ton of fun.
It has been. In the testing, it's been absolutely great. Like I said, the only thing I'd really put is those Celestial Flares, and everything else seems absolutely wonderful.
Well, I expect
Highly
to see you.
recommended.
I expect to see you on camera a bunch today, and hopefully you'll make it all the way to tomorrow morning.
That's where we'd like to
and
really be
then
on camera.
tomorrow night with the back-to-back of the double standard, which
See what's
hasn't
up.
been done before. So,
Right.
thank you so much,
Hey,
Jonathan.
thank you very much, Ruben.
Jonathan Job. I'm Ruben Bressler here at Star City Games, Salt Lake City.